It was 2023 when then Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declared the loneliness epidemic a public health issue. I think many of us had a feeling this was a problem long before that, though. Loneliness has more than psychological consequences. People reporting loneliness are more likely to develop heart disease, dementia, stroke, and have higher all-cause mortality. But loneliness is one of those concepts that we all sort of understand but may have difficulty defining. Social scientists classify loneliness with disconnection under the umbrella term social ill-being. The semantics clearly position this concept against social well-being, which includes factors like connection, companionship, friendship, support, and numbers of friends. But this is where it gets interesting, because I would have assumed that social well-being and social ill-being are two ends of a spectrum. As you move away from one, you move towards the other. But a new paper shows some data that refutes this idea, suggesting the two concepts, while related, still retain independence. In other words, it's possible to be lonely even when you're surrounded by friends. We need to understand more about loneliness before we have any hope to address the issue with any more sophistication than platitudes like touch grass or put yourself out there. Fortunately, we got some really interesting data on the subject this week thanks to this paper appearing in PLOS One. Let me walk you through it. This is a large and fairly representative survey of 4,812 U.S. adults ranging in age from 18 to 95. The distribution of ages were fairly close to the U.S. population, but the researchers oversampled the 18 to 25-year-old age group since they were particularly interested in loneliness among who they refer to as emerging adults. This is a population that has reported substantial loneliness in the past. The surveys administered covered a number of domains of social well and ill-being, as well as information about life changes and other events that would shake up routines. I'm going to show you a couple of graphs that really illustrate the sort of paradoxical nature of their findings. First, look at the relationship between age and loneliness. There's a clear trend here. As age increases, loneliness goes down. It's those emerging adults who are the most lonely. But now look at this graph, number of friends. It's also those emerging adults who have the most friends, the most social contacts. This number goes down with age. You lose about one close friend every decade of life until it starts rising again later in life, which may reflect some increased socializing once the kids are out of the house. But put together, these two graphs lead to an inexorable question. How can it be that young people are the most lonely while they also have the most friends? The authors examined the relationships between factors other than age and loneliness, as you can see here. Loneliness was strongly correlated with a feeling of disconnection. That makes sense, but also isn't terribly informative to me. I'm not sure which way the arrow of causality points in this case. Now, number of friends did reduce loneliness a bit. On average, while young people had more friends and were lonelier than older people, for a given individual, having more friends made you slightly less lonely than a similar person who had fewer friends, if that makes sense. But the effect size is rather small. It's not the quantity of friends that matters, it seems. Is it the quality? Companionship was a fairly strong ward against loneliness. In this context, companionship is distinct from intimacy. It basically means friends that support you. For young people, a good friend is perhaps a bit harder to find. Stress and losing touch with friends drove up loneliness as well. But I was really interested in this somewhat bizarre combination of having both high social well-being and high social ill-being. The researchers essentially conceptualized these two concepts as orthogonal to each other. You can have high or low levels of either. This creates a 2x2 framework that looks something like this. What's wild to me about this is that so many people in this study, the majority in fact, are in this quadrant: high social well-being and high social ill-being. Who are these people? Well, on average, they're younger, they're more likely to be female, more educated, more likely to be dating, and had more friends. In other words, they check a lot of the social well-being boxes. They have friends and companionship, but they still feel lonely and disconnected. The authors show that much of this seems to be related to life disruptions, things like taking on a new job, moving to a new place, losing touch with an old friend. The picture that emerges is one of social abundance, but that abundance is fleeting and changeable. People are moving in and out of these individuals' lives too quickly. They feel the stress of maintaining those connections, but aren't deriving the benefit from those connections in terms of alleviating loneliness. The authors suggest a unifying theory here that loneliness is driven by impermanence, changeability, a lack of what is known as ontologic security. And while all of us can be exposed to those types of situations, this impermanence is really what defines the life stage of these emerging adults. They may have companionship, but they don't have true intimacy. My head was swimming a bit trying to parse all this data, but now that I have a sense of what it's about, I'm less certain than ever what to do about it. If it is the transitional nature of life in emerging adulthood that creates a desert of loneliness amidst a sea of friendships, is that something we're supposed to fix? Or is it perhaps just part of growing up? Is it possible that feeling lonely in our early 20s is a necessary prerequisite to prepare ourselves for the more intimate and meaningful relationships of the future? Overwhelming loneliness is clearly bad, but is a little bit sometimes just normal. Or have we created a society that has somehow disordered the normal growth processes of young adults, and we need to look for ways to restore that ontologic security? I'm not sure, but I am confident that this new conceptualization of loneliness, the understanding that loneliness is not simply the absence of connection, that it is something deeper and not easily solved by increasing the number of people you invite to your dinner party, will be a critical step toward addressing that epidemic that Dr. Murthy highlighted in 2023. Of course, 2023 was 50 years after another great thinker, Billy Joel, wrote this line, which played continuously through my head as I was reading the article. Yes, they're sharing a drink they call loneliness, but it's better than drinking alone. For Medscape, I'm Perry Wilson.